bit of the gift of the gab, I guess, but I too am trying to do a lot more of the listening, as Dr. Thompson suggested I might do. Can I start off by firstly thanking CQU for having the foresight to put something like this together. The notion so quickly in the aftermath of a disaster that we've just gone through and this community has gone through, about thinking to bring people together and taking this opportunity to get some learnings is fantastic, because all too often we get swamped then with other priorities and the opportunities to make learnings are lost. So can I just thank you very, very much for that. I think it's an outstanding initiative, and one that I will be speaking of in my trials, I can assure you. So what are my trials? You can see by wearing my Superman suit that I'm a police officer and an acting AC of police, but I'm actually not fulfilling that role at the moment. I was seconded to the role under the relevant legislation to disaster recovery coordinator for I guess the entire event of Tropical Cyclone Marcia. So essentially my role, which is articulated in the Act and the appointment, relates to, on behalf of the Premier and the Deputy Premier in their roles as chairing the QDMG that was mentioned before, coordinating the recovery efforts. They don't give me a handbook, so I haven't quite worked out what that is, but what I have done is spoken to a lot of people who have been involved in this world before, and also other people, some very esteemed, so I'm a little nervous about that, the likes of Sir Peter Cosgrove and others who have been given this particular job for different disasters, and I did get the opportunity to speak to him when he visited this area last Friday, and I was very humbled that he would give a few minutes of advice there. So my role, I guess, is to recognise that there are outstanding people involved in the recovery and in the response, and the response has been amazing given what this local area has been hit with. I spoke to the actual Assistant Commissioner of Police for this region recently, and he told me that he couldn't help himself because he's a person who likes to dip his toe into the operational areas just like me from time to time when we shouldn't. And perhaps some others should not do that too, and let the operational people do their jobs. But he couldn't help himself very quickly after the storm hit here in Rocky, and he lives here in Rocky, to go for a drive and see what was happening, even whilst the aftermath of the storm was still there, and was already seeing people in this area cleaning up. People from council cleaning up, people in streets helping each other cleaning up. And surely that's got to be an indicator of what we're trying to get, which is a sense of resilience and community engagement. So I was delighted with that. So my job is, I guess, is to, on behalf, and I report to the Premier and the Deputy Premier, is to look at what's happening in the recovery space, and Sue very well described the sort of functional way that that's broken down in the economic sense, the human social sense, the environmental sense, the infrastructure and roads and the building. Now we've got committees that do that at both state level, in some cases at a district level, but certainly at local level. The fear is that sometimes things are lost, things fall through the gaps in that sort of arrangement. So I guess part of having somebody who is external to that normal arrangement come in a, I guess, a coordinating fashion is to get away with asking pretend naive questions and pretend stupid questions, and you get away with it, and it's fantastic. And what it tends to do is, besides eliciting those sorts of looks, it also then gets people to actually think about how to answer those, because it's often the mundane that you forget how to articulate, and so it allows you to rethink those. So I get away with that, asking various people what they do and why not, with a polite face and hopefully a nice collegiate manner. I'll tell you at the end of the exercise whether I get away with it. So I'm based here in Rockhampton, and will be with my colleague Kev Guttridge, who's also an Inspector of Police seconded to this, and who is very experienced also in the world of disaster recovery, having done this role in other events and also assisted with the Bundaberg recovery efforts. Can I say that my first observations, as I mentioned, was that the response has been fantastic. I was very, very interested in the discussions that have been had in the presentation so far. I'm also interested in what resilience is all about and what it actually means. I have been actually taking the opportunity, and Kevin and myself have already attended something like 12 community meetings where we've been listening, taking those observations to let people tell you their story, and they're different. And they're different for different communities, and they're different for different people within the communities. So I think it's complex that there's ever one size fits all with respect to resilience. People deal with it in different ways and at different times and go through a process at different paces. So how do you then build a resilience or a recovery approach when it is so different? And it can only be at a human level, I could imagine, and that is face-to-face and listening. I find it interesting that we use the term resilience already, both in terms of people's resilience, then we talk about the resilience of systems, and then we talk about the resilience of communities, and I actually think they're all different things. They're interrelated, but I think they're all different things. And I think the trick for us in recovery is to recognise that sometimes efforts into personal resilience may actually work against community resilience. And I'm already noticing that in some instances, particularly with strong personalities that tend to stand before. So I am very interested in where this type of research takes us in understanding it. Can I just say, here we are, and we're operating in the aftermath of a cyclone. We have another one, according to forecasts, that is likely to cross in the early hours of this morning, at least at Category 4 by current predictions, in North Queensland. At the same time that there were actually quite significant thunderstorms hitting southeast Queensland, at the same time, people might not be aware that the ComDisc plan was being invoked, where people from Vanuatu were being evacuated by Australian and New Zealand, I guess, resources into Brisbane. And we were all doing this at the same time. So whilst there's very definitely a move for things to be done from the bottom up, locally led recovery, there is a need for entities to be now looking at how we apply that across an entire state and an entire country at the same time. And I think we're well served. We have got some good systems and good people. Of course, we must not lose the opportunity to learn each time, and Mick is probably going, keep going, Brian, keep going, Brian, I'll use up the whole 10 minutes. But I won't. The interesting thing that I've observed about that already is that part of this is about expectations management. That people have different expectations about what should happen in a recovery. And I guess it's about, as supportively as possible from our perspective, is guiding the local people through that and managing those expectations we can. My fear is that if we are to be too paternalistic and top-down driven, that in itself might work against resilience in the long term. But doing that with a sense of empathy and support for our fellow Queenslanders, fellow Australians, fellow humans. And that's a real challenge. I'm also interested in recognising, and again I think a reason for the state government appointing people like myself into this position, is recognising that there's often links that you don't see quite so readily about the effects of a disaster. What I mean by that, it's almost like a supply chain, or if you consider the upstream, the downstream and the cross-stream effects of a disaster that might happen. It might be the case that the meatworks here in Rockhampton, which are shut down for several weeks now, but are working very, very hard due to asbestos issues in their structure, to get back up and running. That is a big deal for Rockhampton, for employment, which leads on to resilience of people. At the same time, however, that's impacting in a different way primary producers upstream, who were planning their lives around delivery of cattle for slaughter, and downstream. We have situations where the graziers around Jambin, who suffered the floods in the Callide Valley, are now thinking about alternatives for where they send their cattle. But that actually might work against the economic realities of using the meatworks that exist here in Rockhampton. So there is a real need to take a step back, have somebody who's not engaged in the local community occasionally coming over, asking those dumb naive questions and seeing where it takes us. And I guess that is a longer version of the definition of what I see my role as being than is in the Act. Again, could I just acknowledge two more things and I'll shut up, Mick, thank you, is the the work of CQU in this area. Thank you very, very much. And secondly, there are a number of people here that I've already got to know and start to work with. We are exceptionally well served by the number of people in NGOs, government departments, local, state, and for that matter federal, that I have engaged with, who have been highly professional and just doing their work in the service of others. And I just can't go without a microphone in front of me without acknowledging that work where we collectively come together. It's a pity we need a disaster to come together so well like that. Thank you for the opportunity.